We have found out lots of ways in which Google just deliberately made things worse for its users to make things better for its shareholders. They didn't have to worry about being good because you were never going to find another search engine and switch from Google to them. So when the moment came, Google decided to make stuff worse.
Now, how long have we got before Amazon just has everything?
The market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. Trump has basically ended the American internet. And now we get to decide what a post-American internet looks like. It's up for grabs. I want to grab it.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. Now, my guest this week has spent decades helping to shape the way we think about the modern internet. He is a campaigner against monopolies, against surveillance, and against digital rights. And he has a new book analyzing how the internet giants have captured us and changed and become not quite as good as we had thought they were. The book is called Enshittification, with the subtitle Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. And it's about the broken systems that we are living in and what we can do to try and make things better. Cory Doctorow, welcome to Ways to Change the World. How would you change the world?
Well, it depends on whether you want to know like broad goals or technical tactics. So my broad goal is that we should have an internet where when people make mistakes and do things that are bad, they go out of business and get replaced by someone else and maybe get punished by the government or lose all their workers. I have some tactics about how I would get there, but that's my goal. Not an internet run by perfected people, but an internet where the defects of people don't become a permanent fact of life.
I think we all know what enshittification means instinctively, but can you lay out the process by which you think it happens?
Yeah, so enshittification, it describes this three-stage process of platform decay, the process by which these platforms that we love turn into giant piles of shit. In stage one, the platform is good to its end users, but it finds a way to lock those users in such that when they move to stage two, which is making things worse for end users in order to make things better for business customers, those users can't readily depart. They have something that's keeping them there. In stage two, you bring in business customers and you lock them in. You make them dependent on those captive users. And then in stage three, you withdraw the value from those captive businesses and from the captive users, leaving behind a kind of mingy homeopathic residue of value that's calculated to be just the minimum needed to keep users locked to the platform, businesses locked to the users, and all the value is harvested for executives and shareholders.
Okay, so let's go through a couple of examples. I mean, do you think this applies to all the giants, first of all, or are there any good guys?
No, I think that it's really all the firms are bad. And I think that, we have to understand this as a product of incentives. So even if you think the firms are good now, they have this enormous pressure to worsen themselves because their competitors are doing it. And because we've rigged the policy environment so that when their competitors do terrible things, they make more money rather than going out of business, which means their shareholders and the market is going to demand that they do this. It's not about like whether you can get someone who's sufficiently heroic and moral to run a business that they don't do this to you. It's whether we can get our policymakers to stop creating the enshittigenic policy environment that rewards companies for being terrible.
That's a great word. What was it again? Enshittigenic.
Enshittigenic. I can do this all day.
Yep.
Like I'm like a Latin student declenching a difficult verb here. And in the Enshitticene is the era we're living through. We would like to disenshittify things, but then there's anti-disenshittificatory forces massed against us and so on. I like speaking English. It's a mongrel language where you can just make up words and then make up words based on those words. It's quite fun. I love that we don't have a language academy who tells us what the words mean.
So I wanted to go through sort of three examples, if you don't mind. And I know you're used
Sure.
to doing this because you've done a lot of interviews around this. But
Yeah.
so sort of bear with me. I mean, I wanted to do sort of Facebook because I think that's
Sure.
one we all kind of understand has changed and perhaps for the worst. Amazon, because a lot of people think, well, we choose to use that because it's good for us. And Google, because despite all the debates around Google, Google obviously claimed to be a force for good and to be campaigning for the ability to migrate data and so on. So let's just go through those three examples, beginning with Facebook.
Sure. So Facebook, I think of as the prototype case here. They really are kind of the people who lay bare what enshittification looks like when it's at home. So when Facebook kicks off, first, obviously, they exist as a way to hook up American college kids who have .edu addresses, but then they open to the general public in 2006. And they've immediately got a problem, which is that everyone who could conceivably be using social media already has an account on MySpace. And so they go to those MySpace users and they say, look, I know you love the rollicking conversation that you get on MySpace. It's quite fun to hang out with all those people. But the last thing anyone should ever want is to be using social media that's owned by an evil billionaire who spies on you. Come use Facebook. It's run by an extremely normal man who will never spy on you. And so we pile into Facebook and we lock into Facebook. And so this is stage one. And the way that we lock in is something that economists call the collective action problem, which, you may know as like, you love the 6 friends in your group chat, but boy, are they a pain in the ass. And not only can you not agree when it's time to leave Facebook, you can't agree on which pub you're going to go to on Friday night. And so you get locked in because you love those people more than you hate Mark Zuckerberg, and you are stuck on his platform. And that inaugurates stage 2, which is making things worse for you, because he knows that you love your friends more than you hate him. So he can make you hate him a little more by bringing in some business customers. So to the advertisers, he says, give us a remarkably small amount of money and we will target ads to them with incredible fidelity. And because we're such proud craftspeople, we have paid for a whole building full of engineers that are going to do nothing except police ad fraud. So when you give us £1 to show an ad to a specific kind of user, we're going to find that user and stuff that ad right in their face. He goes to the publishers and he says, do you remember we told these fools that we weren't going to show them things that they didn't ask to see? Obviously, that was a lie too. Just put excerpts from your own website here on Facebook, add a link back to your own website. We'll cram those non-consensually into the eyeballs of people who never asked to see them, and they'll click your link and give you free traffic, and you can monetize that traffic as you see fit. So that's stage 2. Now, these businesses become very dependent on Facebook. And I think that unless you're like a small trader or someone who's got an econ degree, you probably don't really think much about how easy it is for a powerful buyer to lock in their sellers. I mean, we all know about monopoly, because we've all had rainy afternoons playing the terrible board game until we wanted to kill our family and ourselves. But no one's ever played a board game called Monopsony, which is the corollary of Monopoly. It's the powerful buyer problem. And powerful buyers, they don't have to be that powerful to exert a lot of leverage over the people who sell to them. If you imagine that you're running a coffee shop on a block with 4 other coffee shops, and you're next to an office tower, and the workers in that office tower amount to 20% of your gross receipts, hardly a majority. But if that business goes bust and your gross revenues fall by 20% overnight, that's probably the end of the business. Right? You're not going to be able to make your loan payments. You're not going to be able to make payroll. You're going to have to ask your landlord for rent relief, and you might never recover, because 20% might as well be 100% if we're talking about the sudden drop off of it. So advertisers and publishers become very dependent on Facebook. And so things get worse for them too. Advertisers find that ad prices are going way up, ad targeting fidelity is going way down, and ad fraud explodes in a way that I think like beggars belief. Publishers find they have to put longer and longer excerpts, eventually the whole article, before it will get recommended to someone or even shown to the people who subscribe to them. And if they dare put a link back to their own website, that article is fully suppressed because the link might be quote unquote malicious. And so now Facebook is squeezing those people. They are squeezing you. You have a feed that's basically devoid of the things you asked to see, with just the minimum Facebook calculates will keep you there. And meanwhile, Facebook is in this equilibrium where they've left behind just enough value to keep everyone locked in and harvested the rest for themselves. But they're also in this very precarious state, because the difference between I hate Facebook, but I can't stop coming here, and I hate Facebook and I'm not coming back, it's razor thin, right? You get a live stream mass shooting, people bowl for the exits, the market stages a mass sell-off, and the company panics. And being technical people, they have a technical euphemism. They call it pivoting.
I think I know the answer to this, but is there any defense in the fact that along the way, there was a lot of economic activity? Publishers were getting a lot of views, were making money along the way. People selling were selling. And until it got bad and until the algorithms changed, there was quite a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah, I think that is a defense. I think that's a defense of the idea that if we can make the policy environment better, we don't have to make the people better. It's I would very much like to see Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg in the poorhouse and relegated to an unimportant appendix in history. But the fact is that they ran their companies better when they faced constraints. When they had to worry about competitors, when we didn't let them buy their competitors, when they had to worry about regulators, when we didn't have a cartel that captured its regulators, when they had to worry about workers, when workers had power because they were scarce, a power that they failed to consolidate through unionization, which means that now that they're not scarce, they don't have power. And when they had to fear new market entry, when they had to fear people entering the market with new technologies that could siphon off users and workers and value by offering something better that modified their existing technology, something like an ad blocker or a jailbreak for an app store or for a printer or for a car or for any other product, they had to treat us better. But then we expanded IP law to make that kind of reverse engineering illegal, and so now they're just shorn of any discipline. And it wasn't Mark Zuckerberg who passed the acts in Parliament, or who got Brussels to enact the regulations, or who caused Congress not to update privacy law for 50 years. The last privacy law in America, consumer privacy law, to come out of Congress is a prohibition on video store clerks disclosing your VHS rentals. And literally anything else that happens that violates your privacy is fair game in America. That was the policymakers. They did it.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I don't like these guys, but I think that if we're going to hold anyone's feet to the fire, and if we're to have any hope of having the next round of imperfect people nevertheless deliver value to us, we need to get the policy environment right.
Okay, well, we'll come to policy. I mean, I just want to sort of still explore, does this kind of apply to everyone? I mean, Amazon.
Sure.
Now, obviously, we've all heard criticism of the way Amazon treats workers,
Mm-hmm.
and we're beginning to hear more about how Amazon treats the businesses selling on it.
Mm-hmm.
But for the consumer, don't we still just get whatever we want for a reasonable price?
Well, the reasonable price part and actually whatever we want part are both up for grabs. So what you saw with Amazon's history is a long period of increasing squeezing around suppliers and workers. And as you say, broadly, I think there's been this idea, this kind of Thatcherite idea called consumer welfare, which is that so long as monopolies are only screwing workers and suppliers but delivering value to consumers, that should be fine. And so for a long time, we had this thing from Amazon where you could even be like a bit of a sharp operator, right? You could call up Amazon or email Amazon and say, oh, that thing that I was supposed to get never turned up, and they just ship you another one and bill the merchant, which might be some small trader who's using Amazon as a platform. So there was a long time when Amazon would have your back, but that has ended. So let's take just one example of how this goes wrong. Amazon's search business, they call it an advertising business. When I wrote the book, it was a $38 billion business. Now it's a $58 billion business. It's worth double the total advertising revenue of every news outlet in the world every year. So what is this search business? Well, it's an auction for the search results. So we've replaced the fitness factor for successful products in the economy that was, do you make lots of people happy enough to pay you more than it costs to make this, with the fitness factor of, do you make Amazon's algorithms happy enough by parting with enough money and raising your prices while you do it to sell to people who are sort of locked into the Amazon marketplace, because even if you shop somewhere else, the prices have gone up there too because Amazon's imposed this economy-wide tax. So this is not a consumer welfare story, and indeed the outgoing head of Biden's Federal Trade Commission, the equivalent of somewhere between the Office of Fair Trading and the Competition and Markets Authority. They're, the world's largest, most powerful consumer regulator. This woman called Lena Khan. She made her bones when she was a law student. In her third year at Yale, she wrote a Yale Law Review article called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox. I think it was 2017. And it did something that no law review article has ever done in the history of the world, which is it went viral. People who weren't lawyers read a law review article, and it was basically a rebuke to the people in consumer welfare theory to say, look, you predicted that if companies were allowed to destroy their suppliers and their workers, that they would never turn on consumers. And you were wrong. And Amazon proves it. And, within a few years, she was the most powerful consumer regulator in the history of the world. And she brought an important case against Amazon that Amazon briefed against by saying she had bias against Amazon because she knew too much about them. And only regulators who hadn't studied and published important articles about Amazon should be allowed to seek to regulate Amazon out of a sort of world of like absolute knowledge vacuum.
And where do you think we are sort of on the cliff edge of competitors going out of business, high street stores, shopping malls, smaller online platforms? How long have we got before Amazon just has everything?
It's pretty bad. I mean, we're whether or not they have anything is actually less important than whether or not they structure the market elsewhere. You still have like corner shops, but because you have discriminatory discounting to big box retailers, it is often the case that the guy at the corner shop ordering a case of fizzy drinks pays more wholesale than you would pay retail at a big warehouse store like a Walmart. And so it just means that they're always going to exist at the periphery, that they can never grow and that they could be extinguished at any minute, and they will live and exist in increasing desperation. And also they'll probably have to, find other ways to raise prices around the edges on things that you're quite desperate for, like the infamous water soluble umbrella that every newsagent puts out the minute the rain starts falling. And charges whatever 20 quid for, because otherwise they just go out of business. So it just makes the whole market sour. I'm not going to like bet on the day when Amazon's the only seller. Famously, the market can remain solvent, or the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. But there's a corollary to that out of finance, which is Stein's law, which is anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. And I think that just as dangerous as the market entirely run by Amazon is the market in which Amazon like gets angry at the UK or makes some bad decision where things get much, much worse precipitously, and we can't reboot a pluralistic retail sector to pick it up, and then we just end up with just shit, even worse than what we have now. The problem with a benevolent dictator isn't merely whether they're sometimes not benevolent; it's also whether they're not sometimes competent. Right? If they make a mistake and there's no one to stop that mistake and nothing to pick up the slack, then we're all prisoners of their folly.
Okay. So what about a company like Google, which still claims to want to do no evil, that says,
well, they took that out of the mission statement. They still claim that they want to organize the world's information and make it useful, which is arguably the thing they're not doing.
But they still say, well, look, we believe in openness. You can close, you can take your data. You can have control over how much we know. In what sense is Google also guilty of enshittification?
Well, I mean, Google does not make good on any claims about whether or not its users can control what they know. Very infamously, in one of the antitrust cases against Google, there was a set of memos published by the Department of Justice internally where the person who ran Google location services said that I've turned off location tracking in, I think it was 12 places, and I've just found a 13th where I'm still being tracked. So, I think you should think of the privacy dashboard on your Google settings as being something like the Fisher Price steering wheel that you clip to your kid's car seat so that they can pretend to drive. It's not connected to anything. But speaking of the Department of Justice and the antitrust cases against Google, we have found out lots of ways in which Google just deliberately made things worse for its users to make things better for its shareholders. And in the search case, as reported by Ed Zitron, we see a set of memos going back and forth between two factions of Google executives about the destiny of Google search. So the precipitating event here is that Google search revenue growth had stalled. And it had stalled for the excellent reason that Google had a 90% market share. So you do not grow your market share from 90%. I mean, sure, you can raise 1 billion humans to maturity and make them Google customers. And that's a product Google calls Google Classroom, but it takes a while, right? And in the meantime, the market would like to see increasing returns on this product with a 90% market share. And so you have one executive, this guy called Prabhakar Raghavan, who's an ex-McKinsey guy who comes to the company from Yahoo and who's in charge of Google search revenue. And his proposal is, why don't we just make Google search worse, right? If we turn off all the things where we try and guess at what you meant to make your query better. Some of that is just like query stemming. So that would be like you search for trousers and it runs a background query for pants as well. Some of that is spell checking. Some of that is like context awareness. So, there was this news cycle here in the United States where a person who worked for the US government walking down the streets of DC saw a National Guardsman as part of their occupying force and threw his submarine sandwich at this guy. And it was quite a cause celeb. They called it assault with a deli weapon. And if you search for submarine sandwich on that day, it would be nice if Google was like context aware enough to float those to the top, because it's more likely on that day that you are searching for information about that news cycle. And so Raghavan's proposal is we just turn this stuff off. So you search for submarine sandwich and you don't get the National Guardsman story. So you have to search again. You have to type submarine sandwich National Guardsman. Maybe you don't find the story then. So then you type submarine sandwich National Guardsman DC, and then you see the story. And that's 3 chances to show you ads. They didn't have to worry about being good because you were never going to find another search engine and switch from Google to them. And so this made them sort of immune to competitive pressure. And so when the moment came, Google decided to make stuff worse.
But I mean, the competitive pressure for Google has arrived now, hasn't it, with AI and ChatGPT and their own browser. And you can see young people have already switched from the Google default to ChatGPT as their default. So will that change behavior, do you think? Or will ChatGPT just end up doing the same thing?
Well, first of all, yeah, AI is incredibly enshittification prone because it makes these mistakes that they grandiosely call hallucinations, but which we would call product defects. And it's impossible to tell whether the AI chatbot has done something that is to the company's benefit and your detriment because of these, sort of ineffable, inexplainable hallucinations, aka product defects, or because they put their thumb on the scale. So did you get directed to a product that the company gets a big commission on because that was the best product, or was it because the AI hallucinated? Did your query, which would normally burn 2 tokens, burn 200 tokens and cost you £5 instead of 5p? Was that a hallucination, or was that because the company decided that this was a way to cheat you? It's very hard to tell, and like deposing the engineers and pulling the server logs and making the case would be really hard. So there's an enormous temptation to do this. But there's a much bigger problem with AI, which is that it's not real. AI has spent $700 billion on capital expenditures thus far. They are making at most $60 billion a year, but it's not anywhere near $60 billion a year. To take just one slice of revenue from that $60 billion figure, that's the $10 billion that Microsoft gave to OpenAI, and OpenAI gave back to Microsoft, which Microsoft then booked as revenue, right? This is like someone in a green apron outside of a Starbucks handing you a voucher, and you go and you get a latte, and Starbucks announces that they made £7 from you. They didn't make £7 from you, right? So this is not revenue, right? They have $50 billion max, and it's less than that to recoup $700 billion. And how long do they have to make that much money before that $700 billion is a write-off? Well, they are amortizing or depreciating those GPUs that they bought on a 5-year depreciation schedule. So that would mean that they would have to somehow make $700 billion at $50 billion a year over 5 years, except privately they'll tell you that the GPUs burn out in 2 years. Meanwhile, you've got 7 companies, the so-called Magnificent Seven, that are between 31 and 33% of the S&P 500. This is like the FTSE index, but for America. And they're just handing around the same $100 billion IOU very quickly and pretending that all of them have that in their bank account. And so when the crash comes, and the crash will come, most of these foundation models are going to be switched off, right? Like, it's not just that they would have to charge you to use this. They would have to charge you a gigantic amount of money to use this. They are talking up the demand for this. But, if they had a lot of demand for it, presumably one of the things they could do, rather than borrowing lots of money, or rather than, seeking more money in the capital markets, is they could start charging money for it. That is the traditional way by which firms manage demand that exceeds their
Yeah.
capacity, and they use some of that revenue to build out the capacity. I think they know that if they charged even a penny for this, that especially the young people who are typing into the OpenAI for their search results would just run for the exits. And that's before we even get to whether or not AI can be a good search engine, or whether or not, even if AI could be a good search engine today, whether it could be a good search engine tomorrow. Because, of course, the reason that these companies have the data they have is because they scrape public websites that they now substitute for. And I'm of the view that the copyright question is kind of a distraction. I think even if we reform copyright, or if clarify copyright to make it unambiguous, that you could stop a search engine from training its model with your material if you wanted to, that the firms that represent the entertainment industry, who are my boss, right, the people who pay me as a writer, that the thing they want more than anything is just not to pay me anymore. And so they would say, well, from now on, if you want to do business with us, you have to sign over that right, and then we're going to train a model, and we're going to try and put you out of business. So it's really about like the distribution of the people who make a meal of me, like who gets my legs and who gets my arms. It's not about like protecting me from being devoured by these companies. But you know, the real problem is that, like, who's going to let them scrape their stuff, right? Like, not like who's going to sue them over it. Who's going to let them? Who's going to welcome their crawlers if the only thing that you get at it is the cost of serving the query and no search traffic back? And so I just think it's not real. Like, that's the problem with it. It's not real. It's like asking what we'll do when the anti-gravity machine arrives.
Okay, so look, people listening to this and going, right, what can I do? And I suppose the big point is, you as an individual can't do that much, can you? I mean, this is a government task, and not just one government; it's the world.
Well, yes, I think that, you know, trying to shop your way out of monopolies, like trying to recycle your way out of the climate emergency. You know, the reason billionaires want you to vote with your wallet is because there's not many billionaires, but they have very thick wallets. And so the only vote they ever win is the wallet vote. They never win the vote because there's like 6 of them. So, you know, this is the whole point of trying to get you to fetishize your consumption choices rather than become a member of a polity. And I think you have to become a member of a polity. Obviously, electoral politics in the UK are in quite a ferment. And, you know, where the policies land, where the smaller parties end up, that is like entirely up for grabs. And what we've seen in other periods of dislocation is that smaller parties can become kingmakers, or they can even win surprise majorities or become surprise members of coalitions. So that's one way you can get involved. But there's also the nonprofit sector. So I have worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is an American NGO with a strong European presence. I was their initial European director. And you can get involved with EFF.org. I also helped found a UK equivalent to EFF, something called the Open Rights Group, which you can find at openrightsgroup.org. And it has community groups in cities and in the nations, in Wales and Scotland and so on, that work on these issues. But you said that it has to be all the countries in the world. I actually think that's not quite true. I think this is the secret strength here of the tech policy battle as it stands, is that tech is so slippery and so flexible that if we were to repeal the laws that ban reverse engineering and modification, that you could imagine some smart person down in what we, I guess, have to still call Silicon Roundabout, or maybe, you know, Manchester, or I teach at the Open University, maybe it'll be someone in Milton Keynes, who figures out how to reverse engineer an iPhone and raises the capital and makes the little dongle that you can buy in the checkout aisle at the Asda that jailbreaks your phone and installs a third-party app store. And maybe they sell apps, but maybe they actually sell that to everyone who wants to have an app store. And because digital is so slippery, anyone in the world who wants to buy that product could just get it from you over the internet, right? So I am, like all the best Americans, a Canadian. And Canadians have figured out how to make Americans happy by selling them reasonably priced insulin, which we stick in the post and mail to them. That's a relatively inefficient process. But Canada, the UK, some EU member state, maybe Ghana, which has a lot of engineers, Nigeria, which has a lot of engineers, and not only that, a lot of engineers who've just come home because America has made it clear that if they are caught on the streets in America, they'll be kidnapped by masked goons and sent to a gulag. and where there's capital that has fled America because they'd like to be involved in a business whose success factor isn't solely determined by how many Trump coins they buy, the country that does this first could make, I think, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars destroying the rent extraction machines of American big tech and then exporting those products to everyone in the world, including Americans who are frankly the first victims of this stuff. They were patient zero in this epidemic. So I do think that like we just need one country to break from the bullying that the US trade representatives subjected them to for 25 years to say you must not allow your entrepreneurs and your technologists to put our technologists out of business.
I mean, you mentioned, you spent a lifetime, an adult lifetime, sort of campaigning on this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, given where you've analyzed that we are, doesn't it suggest that the pressure groups and the protest groups don't work or aren't working?
Well, I will say that we've had plenty of victories and plenty of defeats over that time. If we'd only ever lost, I probably wouldn't have made it this long. But we have lost a lot of these fights. And I think what's changed is the coalition partners we can recruit. Anytime you see a group of people who've been trying to make something happen for a long time unsuccessfully, and they become successful, you should assume that they found some coalition partners. It's not that like they just happen on a cool new hack to let the same people apply the same amount of pressure, but force multiply it through technology or through some messaging campaign that suddenly makes it work. It's because they found a way to set aside their differences with other people and make it go. So a lot of people who've been involved in consumer rights and privacy rights and labor rights, they've been arguing about this tech stuff for a long time. And as you say, we have not succeeded to the degree that I would like us to have succeeded. Mostly we fought a holding action, and on the whole, we lost ground. But we
And
have
why? Why do you think that is?
Well, because our adversaries were the most wealthy people on earth who made a lot of money by stealing from the public and then rolling some of that money back into influencing lawmakers, right? When the former deputy PM of the UK gets put on 4 million a year to run around Europe and say, you mustn't break up Facebook because we're the only things defending European cyberspace from Chinese communism. But we have new allies, right? So on the one hand, you have firms and entrepreneurs and technologists who'd like to just make a hell of a lot of money. But then you have another set of allies, which are the national security hawks, who I think are going to be the decisive partners in this coalition. Because Trump has made it really clear America does not have allies and it doesn't have trading partners. It has adversaries and rivals, and it will attack them using technology. And now you have Brussels scrambling to build the Eurostack to try and build European servers with European services that European businesses can relocate to. But unless we legalize jailbreaking and reverse engineering, they're not going to get their data out of these government ministries. No one's going to copy and paste 1 million documents by hand. And it's not just data. Because if you'll recall, when the Russian looters stole those Ukrainian tractors, the John Deere company bricked the tractors, right? Which, like, it's cool if you're a cyberpunk writer like me, it's kind of fun to think about. But if you think about it for 10 seconds, you realize, well, anyone who Donald Trump doesn't like could have all their tractors bricked too. So there is such an impetus for fixing this. So now we have this three-legged stool of entrepreneurs, digital rights activists, and national security hawks, including people worried about China, because this is also a risk for Chinese inverters and solar batteries. It's also a risk for Chinese telecoms companies. We need to jailbreak all of this technology and put open source software in it. And this is finally the moment, I think, where we have enough of a coalition to do it.
And of course, when you talk to any government minister, pretty much anywhere about this stuff, they say, "Well, we can't act alone. We can't declare war unilaterally. We have to work with everybody else." What could the British government do, for example, without European agreement or American agreement?
Right. So instead of saying, let's take our deeply, literally, figuratively, and notably enshittified water and committing it to an endless array of data centers funded with debt that will be white elephants when the bubble bursts, and trying to fire civil servants and replace them with defective chatbots, we could say, well, we're not in the EU anymore. Article 6 of the Copyright Directive that bans British businesses from competing with American businesses by rating their highest margins, we don't need to follow that anymore. We are going to unleash capital to do this, to strengthen our digital sovereignty, but also to do our industrial policy. And so this is a giant opportunity. And it would be something that, rather than indiscriminately hitting the American economy, in Canada we've done retaliatory tariffs, which is to say we made everything we buy from America more expensive. It's a very weird way to punish America, right? It's like punching yourself in the face as hard as you can and hoping the downstairs neighbor says, ouch. And it's totally indiscriminate. Like tariffing soybeans just hits some poor farmer who, lives in a state that begins and ends with a vowel and has never done anything bad to Canada, and who is tormented by the John Deere company who rip him off every time he needs to fix his tractor. Rather than whacking that poor sod, we could make the tools that let him fix his own goddamn tractor. We could put John Deere and the other tech companies that gave millions of dollars to Trump out of business. And we could float our own domestic tech sector that everyone in the world would buy products from.
And why do you think British politicians aren't more interested in this kind of agenda? I mean, are they just scared? I mean, I imagine they would just regard that as a declaration of war on Donald Trump's America, and that's something Britain can't do.
Yeah, I think that 25 years of activism by the U.S. Trade Representative has lobotomized our policymakers. They no longer see this idea that someone else's margin can be their national opportunity. They really think that you should not upset other people's apple carts, that disruption is something that only Americans get to do, that when they do it to us, it's progress, but if we do it back to them, it's piracy. And I think they've just forgotten this policy response. I think a lot of consumers and even technologists have forgotten this policy response. I'm a proud dropout of the University of Waterloo, which grandiosely bills itself as MIT North. And they were kind enough to bring me back for the 50th anniversary of their computer science program. And I gave a talk about this stuff. It was more than a decade ago. It's kind of what set me on this path today. And I had this grad student raise her hand and say, I can figure out how to build a thing like Facebook, but I can't figure out how to get people to abandon their friends and come to it because they love their friends. And what do I do? And I told her about how Facebook launched, because we've kind of forgotten this too. When Facebook started and it was competing with MySpace, their pitch wasn't just, come and use our superior service with its better privacy policy all alone, right? And sit in smug superiority, rereading that privacy policy until your stupid friends get the message and come join you here. They gave those users a bot. And you gave that bot your login and your password, and it would go to MySpace several times a day. It would scrape everything waiting for you on MySpace in your feed and put it in your Facebook feed, and you could reply to it and it would push it back out again. So you could eat your cake and have it too, right? You could see what was happening on MySpace without being a MySpace user still. And when I told this to this grad student, she was like, but can we do that? Is that like, wouldn't that be like wrong to do? And the coda to this is I ran into her a couple of years ago. I was doing a signing in New York, and this person comes up to the front of the signing queue at the Strand and says, I saw you at the University of Waterloo at our 50th anniversary of our computer science program. And I said, I had the most remarkable conversation with a young grad student there. And she said, that was me. And I've devoted my life to exploring how jailbreaking and reverse engineering can make technology better and undo the worst excesses here. So I think that when you awaken people's imaginations to this, right, it's not just that they're cowardly or supine. It's not just that they're bullied by billionaires. They've just literally forgotten it. They have forgotten that there's a totally honorable tradition in technology of reverse engineering a legacy platform to migrate users to a new platform. And that this has been the great engine of dynamism in digital technology, right? When Lotus 123 launched, you could open your, what was the other spreadsheet called, the one that came before it? VisiCalc. You could open your VisiCalc spreadsheets in Lotus 123. And if you couldn't, Lotus 123 would have died on the vine and we never would have gotten Excel.
Do you think you've sort of hit a moment with the book and these ideas? I mean, these ideas have been, you've been bashing away at them for a while. Yeah. But I guess we're all starting to get the extent to which we've been captured. So I suppose, how hopeful are you that you're onto something now?
Well, I'm glad you used the word hope and not the word optimism. I have no time for optimism or pessimism. I think they're both a form of like vulgar fatalism, the belief that what we do doesn't matter, right? Things will get better, things will get worse because of the great forces of history. I think we're the great forces of history, that what we do matters. And hope is the idea that if you can make a material change to your environment, even if you can't see your way all the way to where you're trying to get to, if you can ascend the gradient just a few steps towards that future, that from that new vantage point, you can see pathways that are open to you that were occulted when you were down at the bottom there in the valley. And that in this stepwise fashion, maybe with some traversing and doubling back and so on, it's messy, that you can find your way to a better world. And I'm very hopeful because, as you say, for a quarter of a century, most of my adult life, I'm 54 years old. I've been at this. I'm going into my 25th year in just a couple of weeks. So for most of my adult life, I have been pushing on a door that wasn't just closed, but treble locked. And now the door is open a crack. And people who are just kind of waking up to this stuff, some of them say to me, what are you so excited about? That door is only open a crack. And I'm like, you're goddamn right. It is open a crack. Like, this is the most incredible thing. I've been waiting for that door to be open a crack for a quarter century. Let's push on that door. Right? I think that we are really at a moment, and it's weird that it's Trump that it's delivered it to us. But, when life gives you SARS, you make sarsaparilla, right? Trump has basically ended the American internet. And now we get to decide what a post-American internet looks like. It's up for grabs. I want to grab it.
Cory Doctorow, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.